Hi there, and welcome to this third year Doctor of Ministry video tutorial on preparing your final portfolio. My name is Brent, and I'm the Learning Specialist here at Tyndale, which is a fancy way of saying that I oversee writing and tutoring services. In this video, what we're going to be looking through is exactly what it says here on the slide, preparing your final portfolio. Up until now, you will have seen videos from our department that have to do with preparing for essays and what kind of expectations there are, as well as how to revise and edit your essays. But this video is a little bit different. This one is going to be focused particularly on the kinds of work you need to do to get your documents compiled and ready for submission as your final portfolio. So join me as we dive into what this process actually looks like. And just to give you a bit of a roadmap of what we're going to be doing, we're going to start first by looking at some of the style and formatting concerns. What do we do with things like the front matter and the abstract and table of contents and all of that? And then we're going to actually go into the portfolio itself. What do you do to the actual content to get it ready for submission? And we'll look at that a little bit later, but to start, let's take a look at the style and formatting, beginning with the front matter. So the front matter refers to that stuff that always comes at the beginning of a book, the title page, the copyright page, all of that information. And when it comes to a portfolio like this one, there's a lot of forms and information that needs to be included in those first number of pages. All of them can be found in the Doctor of Ministry handbook. There's explanations on what needs to be included, in what order, and there's even some appendices at the end or some sample forms that actually show you what those things should look like. As a result, I'm not going to go through all of that into too much detail today. You can always take a look at the handbook for yourself to narrow that down. But hopefully, at least some of what we talk about here will help you get ready for what you need to do. The big shared formatting feature for all of the front matter is that the numbers at the bottom of the page, normally Arabic numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are actually going to be changed to lowercase Roman numerals, IV, VI, all of those kinds of things. You will change over to those Arabic regular numbers when you start the introduction chapter of your portfolio. So what then actually goes in the front matter? Well, as I said, you can find it in the Doctor of Ministry handbook, but let me just refresh the order for you here. First off, like with any assignment you've submitted thus far, you're going to include a title page. Now, just note that in this case, the title page should not be numbered. We don't want to have that number included. This will be followed by your thesis approval page. This is a page that basically says, I've done my thesis, here are my 3 readers, and it's been approved to be published. Again, no page number at the bottom of this page. The third page we recommend having is a copyright page. This is going to be exactly, well, maybe not exactly, but close to what you find in a book. It'll have the copyright symbol, the year that you are finishing your portfolio, and then your name written next to it. Again, no page number at the bottom of the page. That changes, however, on page 4, which is the declaration and disclaimer page. This is a page that essentially says, I have completed this work entirely on my own. I haven't plagiarized, et cetera, et cetera. Again, in the Doctor of Ministry handbook, it'll give you the actual wording you need to include. And as I said, this is the first numbered page. So you're going to actually have at the bottom of the page IV for the first time. I'll show you in a little bit what that actually looks like. After the declaration and disclaimer, you're going to have the library release form. This is a form that basically allows the library here at Tyndale to publish and put your portfolio into the library for other students to look at, research, build off of in their own assignments going forward. I also just wanted to mention now that Tyndale also has an agreement with this group called TREN. It's basically a distribution group that is able to get your thesis out to a wider audience than just the Tyndale library. You won't need to include the distribution agreement in your portfolios, but you will need to submit a form to the DMin office in order for it to be distributed that way. So just keep that in mind as you're building these things as well. After the library release form, we're going to have the abstract. This is that short little summary of what your entire portfolio is about. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. And this is then followed by the dedication page. The dedication page is, again, often like what you find in a book, to so-and-so, to your spouse, your kids, your parents, to a close friend who's been with you alongside the whole journey. Whoever it is, if you have someone that you're making out the work to, this is where you would put that information. Followed immediately after then by the acknowledgements page. This is slightly different. If the dedication page is basically who you're dedicating the work to, the acknowledgements page is where you're able to offer your thanks to the people in your life who have come alongside you throughout this process. Again, it can be whoever really you want it to be: spouse, kids, other family, friends, editors, maybe even the doctor of ministry, faculty itself, whoever it is that you want to give your thanks to and your acknowledgements for their support of you throughout this time. This is where you're going to do it. After that, you have the option of including an epigraph page. All of these previous pages are optional, by the way, dedication acknowledgements. The epigraph is another one that's probably less frequently used. This is basically a page where, you know how sometimes in a book there will be like a quote at the beginning that kind of contextualizes or kind of speaks a message over the book that's to follow. This would be kind of like that. Maybe there's a particular quote from a theologian or an author that you think is really applicable to the ideas you're trying to communicate in this text. This is what you would do on the epigraph page. You would include that quotation on its own page. And then we come to the table of contents. This one is pretty straightforward. It's the list of all of the sections that are in your paper. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like shortly. Then you're going to have your lists of figures, tables, charts, illustrations, whatever else you have included in your work. Usually it's going to be a list of tables, list of figures, list of tables and figures, something like that. Usually won't include all the other things as well. For more information on tables and figures, you can check out our Turabian citation video that we've also created that will then give you access to how those should be included into your text. Next up is going to be your list of abbreviations and acronyms. Once again, an optional page. This is going to be something where if you have lots of acronyms in your text, maybe you have short forms for the church or organization you work for. Maybe there's a short form for the denominational body you report to, or a certain theory that you refer to multiple times, and you don't want to spell it out in 5 words each time, so you shorten it to a 5-letter abbreviation, right? Basically, any abbreviations that you use in your text, you should create a list for them as part of your document. And lastly, this is probably the page that is the least commonly included, but you might want to include it. This is a glossary. Occasionally, people want to include a list of all the key terms and their definitions early on in their text. As it says on the slide, you could also include it in the back matter at the end. Though I will say this, whether this gets included or not is kind of up to you. If you feel that it would be useful for some key terms, by all means include it. If you feel that that's not really necessary, or you have a section in your portfolio where you do those definitions that's just a little more natural, totally fine. Okay, so let's dive into a few of these sections in a little bit more detail because I think they are helpful for you to know more about. First off is the abstract. The abstract is a really essential piece of academic writing, and particularly things like this where you're publishing larger works. It's basically a 100 to 200 word summary of your entire portfolio. And I do mean your portfolio. Please don't have your abstract only be about your research project. It needs to be the entirety of the work that you've been working on. You may be familiar with abstracts from your research process, as you may have seen a lot of journals or monographs, occasionally books, though not as frequently, have abstracts. These short little summaries of the entire work that are basically going to provide you with an overview of the project, and that's the same for you. You want to make it very clear within the short summary what it is your reader is getting into, and usually it's going to cover 4 things. First, motivation. Why should I actually care about the problem or the theory or the issue or the ideas that you're bringing up in your portfolio? There's got to be a reason in your abstract to make that very clear early on. Why should I care? What is actually the thing you're arguing about, and why is it significant? Second, go into the methods, procedure, and application. What did you actually do to gather your results? Did you read? What did you read? What project did you complete? Kind of maybe not in a lot of detail because this isn't like a full methodology section, but give a brief overview of kind of how you came about getting the information that went into this project. Next, you're going to give your results and your findings in your product. What did you actually learn? What was your takeaway? What was the solution to the problem? What models explained what you found? And lastly, provide the conclusions and the implications. What are the implications of the text, especially as they relate back to that problem that you addressed or the theories you brought up in motivation? The key here is that you want to emphasize each of these points in proportion to the emphasis they receive in the body of your document. In other words, if you only spend a short amount of time on your conclusions, don't sit here and write half of your abstract being about implications. Maybe it's only the last sentence. Your project is obviously going to be a significant piece of your portfolio, so you might need to spend a little bit more time telling me about that project, but that shouldn't be the only thing you cover. You probably want to go into a little bit of detail about the theories and models and ideas that have influenced your thinking, as you'll often cover in portions of your portfolio as well. So kind of just use that as a guideline. It's not a hard and fast rule, but generally about as much time you spend in the portfolio is how much time you should spend giving it for each of these sections. Big thing is you want your abstract to be something that helps your reader determine if they want to keep reading. You will probably have seen that from your own research. You read the abstract and you're like, that's not quite what I was looking for. Or maybe, yep, that actually seems really relevant. Let me take a look in more detail. That's what the abstract is going to be useful for. As much as possible when you're writing, try to keep it in the active voice. Just a reminder, active voice is where the doer is in the subject position. Brent threw the ball. Brent is the doer. I'm the doer of the sentence. Therefore, I'm in the subject position. Passive voice, the opposite of this, is where the object is in the subject position. So the ball was thrown by Brent. We don't necessarily want to use those as frequently, particularly not in abstracts, because for one thing, they're wordy, but for another, it kind of leaves some ambiguity sometimes about who's doing what. So try to stick with the active voice. Also stick with the past tense. The project investigated. It was tested by the researchers, or maybe if we want to avoid passive voice, the researchers tested, right? That's what we're going to want to look for. Try to avoid acronyms and abbreviations and symbols in your abstract. The main reason for that is if you use a bunch of these acronyms and abbreviations, you're going to also have to spend time explaining them, and that takes up valuable space when you only have 200 words. But on the flip side, make sure you include those key words and themes and ideas that are significant to your project, because that is going to then provide a more accurate summary of what it is you're actually talking about. And the last piece of advice I'd give here is that make the abstract one of the last things that you actually write in the process. It's a little bit like introductions, where you often can't write the abstract properly until you know what it is you're writing about throughout the course of your paper. You can't summarize something if you don't know what it is you're actually arguing at the end of the day. So when you're finished your portfolio, or basically done, that's when you can go and sit down and say, okay, let's build this summary so that people know what it is I'm talking about. All right, so the next big section I want us to focus on for a little bit is the table of contents. Again, very common in books. Because your portfolio is very large, it's worth including a table of contents there as well. You're going to actually call it contents, however, in your portfolio. That's going to be its title at the very top of the page for the first page of the table of contents, but you don't need it on multiple pages if your table spills onto a second or third page. Please don't include any preceding information in the table of contents. By that I mean, back up for a second, sorry. By that I mean all of these things here that come before the table, title page, declaration page, abstract, acknowledgements, epigraph, none of these should be listed as things in your table of contents. But any information that comes after the table of contents needs to be included. So if you have a list of figures and tables, that needs to be included as page Roman numeral whatever, XI or whatever it ends up being. That needs to make sure that it gets included in your table. Let's jump back to... You're also only going to include the first page of each element, not the range. So if your first chapter is actually 12 pages long, please don't list page 1 through 12. Just say page 1. And then at the beginning of the next section, page whatever. And finally, you're going to include subheadings to the third or fourth level, give or take. It kind of depends on your portfolio, what you're doing. You don't typically go past 4. Even that one's iffy. It kind of really depends on where your focus needs to be. Let me give you an example, though, of what that could actually look like. So as you can see here, we have our title at the top, contents. We have our list of figures and tables, which has our Roman numeral. We have our list of abbreviations, which has another Roman numeral. And then we begin with chapter 1, introduction, the number. And notice that we include actual headings. This would be like a level 1 heading within this section. We're going to have the heading, another subheading, more subheadings. And then all of a sudden we jump to chapter 2, which is a great title. And again, it has its page number and so on. This is what you're going to want to be doing for each of the things. Notice that we don't have page ranges. It goes directly to the end of the line. We're going to use dots like is listed here. This is how you're going to want to set your table of contents up properly. But I know what some of you are thinking. How do I actually do this? Do I have to do this manually for every single heading? Fortunately, no. Microsoft Word has some formatting features that will actually build a table of contents for you. Let me show you how that works on Word. All right, so here we have a arguably very poorly formatted sample of what a portfolio could look like. As you can see, we have our title page, we have our dedication page, copyright page, and so on. How do we actually build our table of contents then? Well, first let's go to the proper page. Abstract, dedication, acknowledgements, epigraph, table of contents. Here we go. As I said, we're not going to actually include that here. Instead, what we're going to want to do is go to this References tab and go to this Table of Contents box. This is going to open up some options for the built-in tables and things like that. What I would recommend is doing Automatic Table 1. This is going to give you that title contents we talked about and make sure it looks right. So let's go ahead and click that for a second. And voila, one of the things you're going to see right away, other than that this is incorrect, is that it's already formatted some of these things for us. So let me fix this up with you first though. So we're going to go here, contents. We want to make sure it's proper. We're going to go centered. We're going to go 12-point font. We're going to go Times New Roman. We're going to make sure it's bolded. We want to make sure it is black font, not blue. And we're going to leave a space because you would do that after headings. Actually, it would be 2. You're going to leave 2 spaces because we do that after headings.
Hi, just a quick note because I forgot to mention this when I was recording, but just like everything else in Turabian, your table of contents needs to be double spaced, so make sure you update that accordingly as well. You can do that by going under the little paragraph box there under the Home tab that was mentioned in the Turabian writing video. Thanks.
And as you can see, it's auto-formatted some of these things for us already. So let's actually scroll down here for a second. One thing you'll just want to make sure you do as you change your formatting, you might have to adjust some of your things. We're going to scroll down here. As you can see, chapter 1, we've got some pages here, and then we've got one of our regular level 1 headings and so on. If we go on the next page, there's another heading. And then the title of our chapter. And as we can see, it's done all of that for us automatically. But as you can see here, we've actually got a problem because we had said things like tables and figures and stuff are supposed to be there. So how do we fix that? You're going to go here. You're going to make sure you hit the proper heading levels. In this case, we're calling them level 1s. Don't mind the fact it says heading 2. That's just because of the way I've modified them. We will bring this back to where it's supposed to be. There we go. And then how do we get our table to, or our table of contents to be back on track? Well, we're going to go back to our table of contents. And if you click on it, as you can see, a little box shows up where you can update your table. We're going to click that. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to update the entire table. We don't want to update only the page numbers because we need that other information to show up. So we're going to update entire table. And there we go. Now, I would recommend for these, because they aren't considered the same level technically, just backspace them so that they're on the same level as our chapter headings. They're going to be the equivalent. And as you can see, they're given. Now, there's one other thing you might be noticing, however. I said that tables and figures and abbreviations and things are supposed to have Roman numeral page numbers, whereas this information is supposed to have different page numbers. And actually, this one here is supposed to be number 1. So again, you might be asking, do I have to do all of that manually? No, we can also actually format our page numbers in such a way that the table of contents will do all of this for us. So how do we go about fixing that? Well, to do that, we actually have to include page numbers in the text, and then we can go about shifting it. So let's do that first. How do we insert page numbers? Well, first, you're going to go Insert, Page Number, Bottom of Page, Plain Number 2. Now, right off the top, you'll notice it's actually giving us the number 10. It's not giving us the Roman numerals, so we have to change that as well. As you can see, when the page number gets included, also at the header and footer, it gives us all of these different options. So what we're going to do is we're going to go under this page number option. We're going to click Format Page Number. And then where it gives our little drop down here, we're going to change those Arabic numbers 1, 2, 3 to Roman numerals like so and hit OK. Now, there we go. Our title page here is now page I, dedication page is II, and so on. But the problem is we actually need these first 3 pages to not appear, and then the subsequent pages, once we get to introduction, to change back to Arabic numbers. How do we do that? Well, for that one, we're going to need to use section breaks. So let me walk you through how that works. We're going to close this header and footer for a second. We're going to go back to page 3, the end of the first section here. We're going to put our cursor here at the bottom of the page, and we're going to go under the Layout tab, hit Breaks, and then hit Section Break Next Page. Doing this is going to actually create almost like a distinction in your document. Everything here, everything before this line is considered Section 1, and anything after that line is considered Section 2. As you can see here, you might have to adjust the formatting. This is why I recommend putting it towards the bottom of the page so you do as little of that as possible. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and click on our footers. You can just double click on the footers at the bottom of the page to open it up. And as you can see, it says here footer section 1, and actually on the next page, header section 2. Now what we want to do to make sure that section 1 and section 2 for our footers are different is we're going to go down to the footer end where the page number is. And where you see in this box under header and footer, it says link to previous. We're actually going to unclick that. What that does is it says this here is not the same as this section here. So if we go now to this section here and delete page 3, you have to hit backspace twice. If we scroll up, page 2 doesn't have anything, page 1 doesn't have anything. But if we scroll down to our declaration and disclaimer page, it still says page 4 in Roman numerals. Excellent. So that's our first section break. Now we have to go ahead and go to just before our introduction. In this case, it's going to be our abbreviations and acronyms page. For this one, you're going to want to, again, very bottom of the page, you're going to go ahead and click on Layout, Breaks, Section Break Next Page, maybe backspace 1 or 2 just to be safe. And then what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to go into our footer. And it says same as previous. We're going to undo link to previous. What this does is it now changes this to be section 2 and this to be section 3. So now how do we get this to change? Now, again, in this header and footer tab, we can hit page numbers, format page numbers. We can change this back to numbers 1, 2, and 3. And we're actually going to change this to start at page 1 because we want this to be a new section going on from here. As you can see now, our introduction page is page 1. The previous page is page 12 in Roman numerals. If we scroll down, this one's page 2, and so on. So now we can go back to our lovely table of contents. Over here, we can click on it. We can hit update table again. This time, all we need to do is the page numbers since all of this is formatted correctly already. So we're going to hit update page numbers only, click OK. And voila, it does exactly what we want it to. The tables and figures are the Roman numerals. The chapters and headings are showing up as the regular page numbers that we want. Don't mind the fact that the formatting is weird right now. It'll go away. There we go. That's how you can set up tables of contents and also how you can set up your page numbers for your final document to be ready to go. Now, some of you might be thinking, Brent, I might not be writing or compiling my portfolio for a few months now. No worries. This video will still be available to you down the road. You can always check it out later when it's time for you to do this work for yourself. But for now, let's talk about how you actually go about revising and editing all of your content so that you can make it into a portfolio in the first place. All right, let's talk about building your portfolio. Up until now, all of the assignments that you've been doing for your Doctor of Ministry program have been loosely connected. Sure, they may be building on each other somewhat thematically, or you may have been sensing that some of the courses and assignments have been building towards something, but largely each of the big assignments you've been doing have been independent of one another. They have not necessarily been directly connected, but that changes here. When you're building your portfolio, you're basically combining 3, maybe 4 of the main assignments that you've done over the last few years. The first one is the personal narrative or organizational context, spiritual autobiography, something in that vein, something about kind of a personal narrative that you are building about your own experience. The second one was probably some sort of model of spiritual formation or your leadership philosophy or something in that vein. And then there would have been some sort of field research project where you're actually out in the field gathering information, doing surveys, meeting with people, collecting data, and then doing some sort of project with that information. Occasionally, you may include a 4th essay, but for the time being, we're going to kind of focus on these 3 since that's the standard for the Doctor of Ministry program. The key now then is that you actually want to unite these assignments under a unifying theme. That theme will be related to the theory you've been researching or the problem you've been trying to solve throughout the course of your program, whatever it is your project was kind of trying to do or prove. This is the kind of things that you're going to want to be building towards. And in some cases, that might take some thinking. I know people who have done their Doctor of Ministry program and have come in with a very clear agenda from the front end, in which case combining these ideas are easy. But if you have found that you kind of came in a little bit uncertain as to where you were going or what you wanted to accomplish, and you've kind of been picking up things as you've gone along, this might take a little bit more time to be thinking through, okay, what is that theme? What are the uniting threads that are going to be drawing everything together? In other words, what you really need as you build your portfolio is a plan for how you're going to revise all sections of your portfolio, your introduction, each of your chapters, and your conclusion. But to clarify exactly what that means, remember that chapter 1 is actually your introduction. Just like all of your assignments and essays typically are going to have an introductory paragraph, now you actually need a chapter that serves as an introduction for your entire portfolio. And I've listed here some of the key things that you're going to want to do in that introduction. You're going to want to introduce the problem, provide context and key terms. You're going to summarize each section of the portfolio, and then you're going to provide your thesis statement for the entire thing. We'll talk about each of these individually in a moment, but the thing I want you to recognize now is that you aren't writing a mystery novel. Please do not write your introduction in such a way that it's like you're hiding the results from your reader. As you may be seeing from these things that I've listed above, you actually want to be making it very clear for your reader on your front end. This is what I'm trying to accomplish throughout the course of my portfolio. Don't try and keep it secret. Tell me the ending before you've even begun. You can spoil it for me. I am fine knowing the butler did it. It's okay. But let's actually break down what each of these sections look like then. The first thing you're going to look at is the problem. What is the thing, the issue, the idea that you really want to address? I like to think it is wise to address some sort of problem over the course of your portfolio. And here's one example of what that could look like. This is the first paragraph. It comes from Glathorns and Joiners writing the thesis or writing the winning thesis or dissertation book. And they say, as a good sample introduction, the quest for a better reading program is one of those beguiling challenges that continue to intrigue educators, even in a time characterized by cynicism about educational innovation. Stop right there. We already kind of know in the very first sentence what this portfolio is going to be about. What is that? Finding or the quest for a better reading program. Very clearly expressed on the front end. Remember, not a mystery novel. Tell me on the front end. As we keep going, even after decades of unproductive experimentation, scholars and educational leaders still search for the optimal curricular and instructional approach that will solve once and for all, here it is again, the reading problem. Teachers implement whatever new approach seems to promise amelioration, as long as that new approach is not too discrepant with present practice. Now we're starting to move a little bit off of the problem into a bit more of like potential solution territory. But still, that first paragraph already, before we've even begun, tells me explicitly what it is you're trying to promote or argue in the course of your paper. And then you might, as you build on this, provide commentary. You might talk about different solutions that have been offered in the past, which will then lead to your thesis and the summary of what you're doing and yada, yada, yada. Before we get into all of that, the next thing we want to emphasize is context and key terms. Now, context can vary. It kind of depends on what it is you're trying to do in your document. Sometimes you might provide further background on the problem. Maybe you need to provide some details, a historical analysis. Maybe you need to actually provide how the problem has developed over time. You don't want to just focus in on the immediate moment, but how it's built to those things. Maybe you want to look at significant people or ideas connected to the problem. Are there significant figures who have tried to deal with it in the past, or solutions that have been proposed in the past that have fallen short? I actually recommend providing maybe a little bit of context on that, perhaps even a reason or two why you feel those things aren't relevant and why your solution, which you're going to get to in a little bit, is actually better. I recognize that some of this might be covered a little bit later in your portfolio. Please don't give away all the information, but a little bit of a summary here doesn't hurt. Maybe think about how the problem speaks into larger themes or ideas also mentioned in your portfolio, or some other context that depends on whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Remember, there's not a hard and fast rule, and a lot of this depends on what it is you are trying to communicate. But provide me that background information I need to understand what it is you're going to try to prove or argue or defend or show in the next 150 pages. And this actually is where key terms comes in. Now, I'm not going to read this whole paragraph. You can pause the video if you want. But basically, Thomas and Brubaker here are arguing that essentially that definitions matter. When you are starting a paper, the way you define your terms is going to actually set the stage for how everything in your portfolio is understood. To give you an example of why this matters, I want you to think a little bit about like the big debate between Calvinists and Arminians about free will. Right? The Arminian would say that free will is basically the most important part of human identity in a lot of ways. God has given us free choice to be able to do whatever it is we want, and he would never interfere with that because that would take away what it means for us to be human. We are able to do whatever we want. And the Calvinist would counter, well, that doesn't make any sense because we can't do whatever we want. I can't just walk through that wall over there. So true free will doesn't really exist in that sense. And even within that scope, free will isn't about the ability to do anything. It's about the ability to make real choices, which is something God gives us to do, even though he's ordained our days and actually knows exactly what we're going to do and has preordained what we're going to do. I recognize I'm generalizing the argument here, but I hope you kind of get the sense that if you were writing a paper on free will, the Arminian and the Calvinist would come at it from very different perspectives. And in the same way, if you are writing a paper about a certain theoretical method for leadership development or for spiritual formation, or maybe even just like a certain term that you're using frequently throughout the course of your paper that could be understood in different ways, it's very important then that you define exactly what you mean by the term so that all of your readers are on the same page about what you mean. Another very important piece of the introduction is the summary of your portfolio. You actually should be including short summaries of each of the chapters of your portfolio. Tell me in advance exactly what that is. Tell me in chapter 2, I will look at blah. It's probably the only time in your portfolio you can get away with the future tense. Tell me what you're going to cover in each section. Tell me in a little bit of detail. I'd like to say about a paragraph, maybe occasionally two, but about a paragraph for each chapter, and a decent sized one. Don't give me 2-sentence summaries. Give me like a decent idea of what it is you're going to argue in each chapter so that I'm aware before I even begin how you're going to prove whatever it is you're trying to show about the problem, the theories, etc. And then round it out with your thesis statement. Now, we've talked about thesis statements in previous videos. It's a statement in which a writer affirms or defends the specific idea that will focus or organize a paper. But this one is a little bit different because now it's not just about a sentence that defines your idea. It's kind of like your definitive argument, your definitive claim, right? As a result, it might not be one sentence. It might actually be a whole paragraph. But the key here is that if you had to basically summarize your entire portfolio into one big idea, one main claim, that's what your thesis will be. Again, I don't want to say one sentence because I think sometimes, especially at this level, that thesis might need a little bit more time than just one sentence to explain, but it should provide the overarching idea about the theory you're discussing and about the answer to the problem that you've addressed throughout the course of this introduction. In other words, your introduction is all about setup, and you are basically preparing your reader for everything they need to know so that when you dive into the main content, those chapters you're compiling, they will be well prepared to understand what it is you're going to talk about. So now let's actually talk about those chapters. So as I said before, the typical Doctor of Ministry program combines three things. It provides personal narrative situation. It provides like your theoretical situation. And then it provides something about that action research project that you did out in the field. Sometimes, as I said, you might bring in a fifth chapter or a fourth essay for chapter 5 to just kind of round out your portfolio or add a little bit more. I only would recommend doing that under your advisor's discretion as you've chatted with them and come up with a plan for why that actually is relevant to your paper. Now, The order you cover those things in will vary. I've been using kind of that like personal narrative, theoretical perspective, field research as the standard because it kind of flows well. Tell your story, look at the theories, and then see how it's applied in the field. It won't necessarily always go that way. Maybe the theoretical has to go first. Maybe the theoretical came after you did your research. It kind of depends on what you're doing, but you need to figure out what best serves your paper based on what it is you're researching. But the key here is that you can't just plunk them in as they are. You need to be making revisions, and you're going to be making revisions basically on two main things. First of all, the feedback that your professor gave you. If you submitted your chapter or your essay and your professor said to you that they felt that this area, this one section, this of the essay needed a little bit more work, then you should probably be putting some work into that before you include it in your paper. If they felt that there was an argument missing, maybe you should do a little bit of research and add a few pages on that. If they felt that something was kind of going off on a tangent and not overly relevant to what you're trying to say, maybe that's something that should be removed from your final portfolio, and maybe something else can go in its place, or something else can be elaborated on further to fill in the gap. But it's not just your professor's feedback you want to be thinking about. We also want to figure out a way to revise it so that your chapter fits within that thematic discussion we've been doing in that introduction, the key themes and ideas and problem and theories that you've been addressing. You also want to adjust your chapters a little bit to fit with those things. And there's two main areas you want to do that. Beginning with the introduction of each individual chapter. Remember, each chapter still has an introduction paragraph or two or three that kind of sets the stage for that chapter. In other words, you want to update the introduction of each chapter so that it summarizes that chapter still, while also making connections when possible back to previous chapters. If it's chapter 2, you might be making a connection directly back to that thesis that you just dropped at the end of the introduction chapter. If it's, say, chapter 3 or 4, however, you're going to want to refer back to the chapter or chapters that came before it. A good example of this I have written here. In Van Ginkel's portfolio, she opens her third chapter, which for her was a literature review, by saying that the literature selected, this is in that first sentence, quote, resonated with the interweaving, inclusive, and incarnational themes explored in chapter 2. Note how direct that is. It's actually directly calling back to the themes and the content discussed where? In chapter 2. You can be that direct. It's fine. But give wherever possible kind of that linking phrase, that linking sentence or sentences that tie it back to what you just talked about previously. Similarly, for your conclusion, you still want to jump back to and summarize the things that you talked about in that chapter, but you should also point forward in some way. As Thomas and Brubaker say, this chapter is finished. Prepare for the next one. And really, it's hinting at what's to come. Give me a hint about the field research project that you're going to be covering in chapter 4. Tell me a little bit tell me that in the next chapter, we will look at the practical applications of the theoretical that we just looked at in this chapter. That's totally fine to do. In fact, it's encouraged because it's going to help create a unified sense and coherence throughout the course of your entire portfolio. And then, as I said, remember to make explicit connections back to the main theme, problems, ideas, etc. throughout that chapter. That means that some paragraphs might need to have like a little bit of an addition thrown on, or maybe your concluding sentences occasionally aren't just going to tie back to that chapter, but maybe ties back to your bigger thesis that you talked about in the introduction. That's fine to do. You can make those changes to create that unifying whole. And then lastly, there is also the conclusion chapter, usually chapter 5, occasionally chapter 6, if you've added a fourth essay somewhere in there. And just like we just said that the conclusions are somewhat about summarizing and pointing forward, we're kind of doing a similar work for your big conclusion chapter. I will admit, though, that while there is some summary, there's definitely less of that. Your focus in your conclusion chapter should be pointing forward to implications and conclusions for your reader to take away from your project more than anything. Now, there's a few different ways you can do that. I've given 4 options below. Maybe you're going to just more generally give the implications of your findings. So you've spent a lot of time talking about the theoretical and your personal journey and how this was applied in the field. Now you might sit here and say, okay, now what? So now that we know all this and now that we've seen it in action, what does that mean for me today as the reader or the person who's even grading your portfolio? What does this mean? Why is it significant? How can we apply what we've learned going forward? You may want to talk a little bit about difficulties that could arise from adopting your conclusions. Maybe you say that churches should do X thing. Explain how that might take a little bit of time. It might be difficult. People might not agree with you going into it and what you're going to have to do to kind of circumvent some of that. Talk about some of the means, benefits, and reasons that a group or an organization or a church might adopt your conclusions. Talk about the things that are going to be beneficial for them. How can they actually go about it? And in a more academic sense, you might even talk about how other researchers might build on your findings. What are further questions that were raised that either you or another researcher could look at in more detail to help build on this topic going forward? These are the kinds of things you want to cover in your conclusion. And again, the whole point here is building on that theme, that theory, that problem that we've talked about. You're going to want to be incorporating that to some extent as well. How do we see that these implications are maybe not only the answer to the problem, but also provide more opportunities going forward? So again, the whole point is unity and coherence. How are we keeping these main themes and ideas and problems and patterns alive throughout the entire body of your portfolio? If you do that well, your professor and your reader won't even be able to recognize that you had kind of submitted these as separate pieces. They're going to feel like one united whole that is going to help prove the thing that it is that you set out to, or maybe have adjusted into over the course of your study here at Tyndale. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about very briefly is a couple pieces of back matter. The first thing is appendices. Appendices are something that come up a lot in portfolios. Basically, it's because it's covering supporting material that can't be easily worked into the body of your paper. That's from the Turabian manual. Basically, there might be times where there's like a form that you had somebody fill out in order to be part of your research project. Well, you're not going to just plop that into the middle of your paper. That's going to be included at the end of your document in an appendix. Maybe there's a small piece of writing that is kind of a like sidetrack, a tangent that you think is important, but is not quite important enough. Maybe that gets a short call out in an appendix. Maybe there's a table or a figure that just didn't quite fit, or it's a series of tables that are in a row that are closely connected, and you don't want to spend 3 pages doing that as part of your paper. Great place for it is the appendixes. If you have more than one appendix, use uppercase letters, Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C, and so on. Just like with the rest of your headings, you're going to leave 2 blank single-spaced lines afterwards. And whenever you refer to an appendix in your text, do that idea, Appendix A, Appendix B. Lastly, we're not going to talk too much about citation. As I said, there's an entire other writing and Turabian style video where you can learn about citation and what you're supposed to do and how that works and how to use our academic integrity page. More on that in a second. But I do just want to remind you, you need a reference list for your final portfolio. Once again, it is in author date Turabian style, so please make sure it's with the brackets, your last name, year of publication, page number, not footnotes. And the big thing here is don't include references to sources you didn't use. So if you did a bunch of research and there was some books that you read that were really good, but they just didn't quite fit into your final portfolio, don't include them in your reference list. Take them out. They're not necessary. Don't pad it with more information. Only include the sources you've actually used. When it comes to scripture, you don't need to include scripture in your reference list. Just make sure in text that you provide the translation names and that you used so that that's kind of serving as your reference for that. And if you do have questions about how to cite specific sources, Chapter 19 of the Turabian Manual is a great place to start, but we also have some other things that you can do as well. And that brings us to my last slide for today. So now what? Well, you are welcome still to make an appointment with us at Writing and Tutoring Services. The only caveat I will kind of say for this one is that at this stage of the game, there is only so much that we can help with, right? We will not be able to sit down and read your entire 150-page portfolio in an hour. That's just not possible. But what we can do is help with some of the formatting things. If you watch this video and you're like, I don't know, man, that table of contents stuff is just kind of too much for me, we're happy to sit down with you here and work through that with you. If you've got questions about referencing, maybe you're struggling with building your abstract, maybe there's like a portion of one of your chapters that you're like, I really just need help with this section that's new and I don't really know what to do with it. We're happy to sit down and help you with that. To book with us, log on to classes.tyndale.ca, click on the appointments button in the Writing and Tutoring Services box on the right side of the page, and then follow the prompts, and then we'll be able to work with us there. I've also mentioned our Turabian citation guide. Let me just quickly show you again what that looks like. So this page here has loads of information about how to format things. Again, this is a bit more for papers, so maybe take the formatting with a grain of salt. The portfolio will be a little bit different, but things like what should your headings look like and your font, and all of course our citation information here. What do you do if you're citing a journal article or a monograph or a commentary that's multi-volumed or whatever the case may be? You can take a look at this source here on the Tyndale website. On the academic integrity pages, it's going to give you loads of information to make sure that you're citing and referencing properly and maintaining those academic standards. You're currently watching this video, so you should hopefully at least be somewhat aware of our YouTube channel, CAE Talks. That's the link that we're currently watching this video on. You're welcome to click on the little CAE Talks button below, or just type in CAE Talks on the YouTube search bar, and it'll give all the videos that we have here. We have things from all over the Center for Academic Excellence. I, of course, will recommend the writing videos if you want to, update yourself on those revision techniques, or how do I do paragraphs properly again, or all of those kinds of things. If you do have any other questions, of course, you can also email us at writing@tyndale.ca if it's a smaller matter, and we're happy to answer that for you. And finally, all I can recommend at this point is practice, practice, and practice. At this stage, you're a good ways into your Doctor of Ministry degree. You're very close. There's probably still a little bit of work to be done before you do the final copy. So keep on practicing, keep on writing, keep on working at it, and you're going to finish up strong very soon. And with that, I hope you found this helpful. All the best as you continue your writing and finalizing these portfolios so that you can be ready not only for submission, but for hopefully graduation soon. Take care and God bless.